In 2004, the world's first 64-bit laptop was ever manufactured. This laptop shipped with the brand new AMD Athlon 64 Mobile 3000 Plus processor at 1.8 GHz, paired with 512 MB of RAM, a 60 GB hard drive, DVD-ROM CDRW combo drive, ATI Mobility Radeon 9600 graphics, a 15.4-inch WXGA display, and integrated wireless G, all in a package that would have retailed for more than $1,500. You might not expect this kind of product from a company like eMachines, and yet, that's exactly what happened. The M6805 released in January of 2004, along with the M6807, which is pretty much identical to this computer, except it has a DVD-RW drive and only has integrated ATI graphics. So arguably this is probably the more interesting computer since it has that GPU. In 2024, 64-bit computing is, for now, the norm. But 20 years ago in 2004, it was a very new thing. The Athlon 64 platform launched in mid to late 2003, and eMachines were the first to ship a brand new pre-built with the Athlon 64 processor in the T6000. Now, they're the first to ship a laptop with the brand new mobile Athlon 64. Now that's all well and good, but trying to actually take advantage of that 64 processor on a PC like this is a little bit hard, for this machine only shipped with Windows XP Home Edition, which isn't a 64-bit OS. But even still, just in performance and instruction sets and things like that, the CPU was way better than the Athlon XP M2500 Plus that's in the M5309, the lowest end offering in eMachines lineup in January of 2004. 19 years later, in 2023, I bought this exact laptop for $20. And it's pretty much identical to its original configuration, except for it was missing some of the RAM, so I upgraded it to 768 MB of RAM, and the original hard drive was replaced with a 120 GB hard drive. eMachines marketed this thing as the commuter computer, stating that it's thin and portable, and also stating that the M6805 offers exceptional performance and true mobility, proving that good things do come in small packages. Laughable today when you consider that the M6805 is more than 6.5 pounds without a battery, and is more than 1.5 inches thick. With that out of the way, let's take a closer look and see what the E has to offer for ports. Starting on the front of the laptop, we have 2 stereo speakers, the hard drive bay, the latch for the display, the power on, and the battery charge indicators. On the right side of the laptop, we have the DVD drive. On the back of the laptop, we have the DC 18.5 volt power plug, microphone and headphone jacks, a 56K modem, along with a 10100 Ethernet port, VGA, with the screws, 2 USB 2.0 ports, S-Video, Kensington lock slot, and 2 cooling vents. On the left side of the laptop, we have a 3rd cooling vent, Mini 1394, 2 more USB 2.0 ports, a PCM-CIA slot, and an SD card reader. Now, despite this laptop's looks, it's all plastic. And this particular one has seen some better days. It's got some scuffing on the silver piece on both sides, and down by the hinges, the plastic is cracked on both sides. About the hinges, by the way, on this particular laptop, the hinges are not doing well. They are quite loose. Even after tightening them, they are quite loose, and in this particular laptop's case, the display cable is also getting flexed since the brightness is flickering. On the base of the laptop, we have the spots where the stickers used to be, but most of them were gone when I got this computer. The power button, some hotkeys for search, internet, and mail, along with volume up and down keys and a media player shortcut. There's also a 4th cooling vent on the base of the laptop, and the eMachines logo, which is on the palm rest of the laptop instead of the display for some reason. We can also see the relatively decent touchpad for its time, including a scroll area, and buttons that are relatively clicky and do the job. There's also some LEDs for AC plug status, Wi-Fi status, caps lock, num lock, and the hard drive LED. And finally, the keyboard, which is decent on this machine. It feels relatively average and sounds relatively average for its time. The problem I have with it is that the layout is kind of stupid. For some reason, there are 2 Windows keys on this keyboard and 2 backslash keys. Also, insert is down here for some reason. All this means that the spacebar on this thing is comically small. It's just about 2 inches long. I mean, it works, I guess, but it still just kind of bothers me, to be honest. And finally, we have the display area, where there is literally nothing happening except for the actual display itself, which gets decently bright. It's 1280 by 800, but like I said earlier, this particular one's display cable is failing, so the screen brightness fluctuates all the time, so I don't like moving this computer too much. Trying to find another one of these is probably not gonna happen. On the bottom of the laptop, we have several smaller intake spaces. The spots where the rubber feet used to be. The Wi-Fi card. The single RAM slot. Yes, that is one of the drawbacks to this machine. eMachines decided to only have one single DIMM slot and solder the rest of the RAM to the motherboard. Or at least if they didn't, then the other DIMM slot is in such a stupid place that it's worth complaining about. There's also the spot for the hard drive screw, the spot for the battery, which in this machine's case is gone. I did get a battery with this computer, but it wasn't the original battery. It didn't work, and the cherry on top is that it started bulging, so yeah, I just took it out of here. There's also the support sticker and the Windows XP COA, the RF information, and the eMachines product sticker. This thing needs all of the power in the world. Also, if you haven't already noticed, this is one of the last eMachines products that had no influence from Gateway. This is purely an eMachines product, as this computer was manufactured a few months before eMachines purchased Gateway. However, eMachines still sold this line of laptops later into 2004, and Gateway would end up rebadging their own versions of the same computer. So if you saw my restore video on this thing, you'd have known that this computer has Windows XP on it. However, I figured it might be worth going and taking a look at the BIOS on this thing first, because there isn't a lot to see. Hopefully you like fan noise, by the way, because you get that with this laptop. In the BIOS, we can see the hard drive, the optical drive, the CPU and RAM and BIOS information, enable or disable the diagnostic screen, the summary screen, enable or disable PXE booting, or change the RF power state. We can also set a password, obviously, and change the boot order. And that is it. That is literally everything this BIOS has to offer. It is one of the most basic BIOSes I've ever seen on a laptop before. So with that, let's go ahead and boot in the operating system. You might have noticed this screen, by the way. This is that summary screen. For some reason, this laptop does this. I've never seen another computer that has this summary screen. And even more strangely, it's enabled by default on this one. Now, I could turn it off, but the problem is that the CMOS battery on this thing isn't very good, so more than likely it's just going to turn itself back on. To me, what this probably means is that there was not a lot of customization going on with this motherboard or its BIOS, since there's several options like hard disk 1 and 3 which just aren't possible on this computer. Now, I do have a small confession to make about the operating system on this machine. I ended up reinstalling Windows again after I did that restore video because I had some problems with the original OS install causing conflicts with drivers and software like that. So I reinstalled Windows XP and this time installed Windows Media Center Edition because I knew that the computer could run it. There's the laptop's speakers in action. Speaking of which, the speakers on this laptop are okay. They get decently loud enough to drown out the fan noise on this computer, but they don't have a lot of clarity or bass or anything like that. Not that I'm sure anybody would have expected that on an eMachines product, but still, they're fine, I guess. I mean, they'll work. Now, as far as programs go on this machine, there isn't actually a lot going on because I just recently reinstalled Windows on a whim. This machine has image burn on it though, so I can test that optical drive because, well, it's not good. In fact, straight up, it is one of the worst optical drives I've ever seen. Using a CD is fine, but it constantly has errors, and trying to use a DVD, this thing basically cannot read DVDs because it is so astronomically slow. The whole reason why there's pretty much nothing on this computer is because it took so long to install Windows off of this drive. And oh yes, it's just as unreliable with DVDs. This machine also has Microsoft Works Suite 2005, which actually did ship with the computer originally, though it was the year older version from 2004. Get 3 top-of-the-line Microsoft products valued at over $210 just for $99. Offer expires 9/15/05. Nice. Anyways, this is Works version 8. Most of the programs on this computer are part of Works, including Encarta 2005. Microsoft Picture It Premium 10, Microsoft Money 2005, Microsoft Streets and Trips 2005, and Microsoft Word XP. About half of those programs actually came on the original install, including Works and Money. This machine also has my software for mounting ISOs, Windows Live Essentials 2009, an old version of Adobe Photoshop and Premiere Elements that I decided to throw on this thing for fun, but didn't actually get time to mess with, and Supermium. And that's it. That is all of the software on this computer. I thought about installing some of the applications that came with this computer new, mainly the multimedia stuff, but there's a lot of things on there that just kind of really weren't that interesting anyway, so I don't know. I think it's just kind of better to have a clean install anyway, since like I said, the original media that was on this computer was causing driver issues. I suppose there's also the Windows XP Media Center program, though again, this didn't come with the computer, but still, I mean, it's fun. Interestingly, that Adobe Photoshop software ties itself into Media Center, but again, this isn't really relevant to this laptop. Alright, I did also install SpeedFan on this while recording, because I wanted some software that would view the temperatures on this thing. This thing definitely needs a repaste, but it requires the entire laptop to be disassembled, so I haven't gotten to it yet. Alright, now it's time to try some games on this computer because it has that discrete GPU. For a bit of comparison, I'm trying pretty much all of the exact same games I did on the XPS M1530 on this laptop. It's not entirely fair, but I don't really know what else to try. Including some ones that wouldn't launch on the other computer because Windows Vista is stupid. Starting off with Need for Speed Underground, the original. I set the display to 1024x768 and put on medium detail just to kind of establish a baseline, and yeah, this computer runs this game pretty well, to be honest. There are some stutters and slowdowns, but for the most part, it's pretty good. Similarly, I tried Need for Speed Underground 2, which is a newer game, and on the exact same settings, it really shows. It did kind of struggle a bit more on this computer. I don't have an exact thing to measure the frame rate, but it was pretty choppy. Although setting the display to 800x600 did help, and overall I'd say the game is still playable on this computer, even if it's not amazing. It did also crash halfway through my testing, so that was cool. Next I figured I'd try Flatout again on this computer. Like I did with those other games, I set this thing to 1024x768, and yeah, it runs relatively okay. Though, again, when there's more things going on the display, it starts to slow down. I think you're probably starting to establish a bit of a theme here. Speaking of struggling, its successor, Flatout 2, struggles pretty bad on this computer at, like, base settings. I mean, this doesn't really surprise me that much. This computer just barely falls under the minimum requirements for this game. Here's Halo, just for fun. You might notice, by the way, there's a white line at the bottom of the display. That's not a problem with the actual computer, that's just how this computer is when it's at lower resolutions. Also, SimCity 4, which didn't run on the other computer, but on this computer it runs, and honestly, it doesn't do it too bad. I mean, obviously it stutters when there's quite a lot going on, but that's just kind of how SimCity 4 is. I mean, this computer had this game on it when I got it, so clearly the original owner was happy with it. I tried the bigger city tutorial just to put this computer to work, and it still handled it pretty well, honestly, considering it's SimCity 4. Again, it's not amazing, but it's playable. Now, it was at this point, around the time I got to San Andreas, that I started having some problems with this GPU. Obviously, it runs GTA San Andreas just fine, but it started stuttering pretty bad, and it started artifacting as well. And when I tested Bejeweled on this thing just for fun, it had finally had enough. So yeah, while this computer can do games, it's pretty clear that it wasn't meant to do that. During games, it gets up to about 80 degrees, and I mean, it got hot enough to shut the computer down due to overheating. Some of this, again, is probably because this thing needs a repaste, but again, some of this is because this is just a hot combo, and that's what happens when you put a cutting-edge CPU and GPU into a laptop. I mean, all those vents aren't for nothing. As far as other hardware features of the laptop go, the Wi-Fi in this computer is crap and just doesn't work most of the time. And that hard drive, while it has quite a few hours on it for a laptop drive, it's still relatively decent, even if it isn't the fastest thing in the world. Arguably, this would have been a better experience than with the original 60 gig 4200 RPM drive, since this is at least a 5400 RPM. Now finally, because I wanted to do it, the web browsing test. I have Supermium on this PC for a modern web browser, but with an old single-core processor and not a ton of RAM, obviously this experience goes about as well as you can expect. That's not to say this computer can't do newer things. In fact, the original owner of this computer used it for a very long time, all the way up until 2012. But the internet has moved on since then, and these days, trying to run the internet on it is going to be a struggle. In fact, trying to run a whole lot of anything modern, even operating systems, is a struggle on this machine. While it has that Athlon 64 mobile processor, this computer is held back by a pretty crappy VIA chipset, meaning Linux is kind of and I haven't been able to get more than 768 megs of RAM to work in this computer, which means even Windows Vista is pretty bad on this computer. So in general, that CPU just kind of is held back, to be honest. For Windows XP things at least, it is a pretty good laptop though, even if it isn't perfect. In fact, arguably, this is probably one of the first eMachines products that I think I've ever seen that I might actually call a good product. I'm definitely glad I picked this thing up, even though I will admit I had no idea what it was, meaning that's how little significance it has. But again, I'm glad I picked this thing up, and for Windows XP things, it is a pretty dang good laptop. Ignoring the fact it can't actually really run a 64-bit OS, like I said earlier, the CPU is still massively better than anything Intel offered at the time, and anything AMD had offered before it. So I'm definitely going to try and do my best to keep this thing working and hang on to it.